I'm Dana Sparks, Managing Broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta, and today's contract tip has to do with extending a closing. So if you have a buyer and a seller and they have an agreed upon closing date in the contract, and for whatever reason one of the parties must go beyond that contract closing date, you must complete some sort of amendment in order to extend that closing date. Now, if you are binding on the GAR contract form, you have two options under which to extend the closing date. The first one is by amendment, and the second one is with the unilateral notice to extend. However, with the unilateral notice to extend, there are only certain conditions by which you can use that form. Let me read. The unilateral notice to extend is GAR Form 133, and either the seller or the buyer may invoke their option to extend it with only one signature, hence the term unilateral. However, just for these reasons, the seller cannot satisfy valid title objections, excluding A, liens, judgments, and deeds to secure debt that can be satisfied through the payment of money or by bonding off the same, and B, title objections which do not prevent the seller from conveying good and marketable title. So if either of those conditions are the reason to extend, you cannot use the unilateral notice. The buyer's options is buyer's mortgage lender, if any, including in all cash transactions, or the closing attorney cannot fulfill their respective obligations by the date of the closing due to no fault of the buyer, provided that if buyer is obtaining a mortgage loan, buyer has already obtained a loan commitment from the mortgage lender. So those are the only two reasons by which either the buyer or the seller may utilize the unilateral notice to extend if you are binding on the GAR contract form. The other way to extend a closing date if you're binding on the GAR contract is with the amendment to change closing and possession date. This is GAR Form F104, and this specifically allows for the date to be changed and the possession date to be changed, the closing date to be changed and the possession date to be changed. In this amendment, it also has an option for the parties to either continue to allow the unilateral notice provision to still be included or not. One more thing about the unilateral notice is that it can only be used one time to extend a closing, and that is clearly delineated in the actual purchase and sale agreement under paragraph B5 under closing and possession, where it talks about the extension of a closing date. It specifically states, if the right to unilaterally extend the closing date is exercised once by either buyer or seller, the right shall thereafter terminate. So it's not once per party, it's once in the contract period. Therefore, if you are binding under the GAR contract form and you need to extend the closing date, my suggestion is use the amendment. Get agreement to extend the closing date till whatever time. Then if for whatever reason you still can't close on that date, you still have the unilateral notice if it fits one of those provisions as I just read to continue to extend it. So the unilateral notice is strictly a one-time shot for either buyer or seller. Now, if you are binding under the RE forms, then the unilateral notice to extend does not apply. There is no 7-day unilateral right of extension for either buyer or seller for any reason if you are binding under the RE forms contract. Therefore, what do? Well, you just use the general amendment to extend the closing date and possession date. So what happens if both parties won't sign the amendment? Well, then whoever is not able to close at the original closing date will be in default of the contract. So that is how you extend a closing date of a contract, regardless if you are binding under the GAR form or the RE forms. Once again, I'm Dana Sparks, Managing Broker of Maximum on Realty Greater Atlanta, satisfying all your needs with service, innovation, and education. Thank you for watching.